Hello everyone, my name is Eisenherz. You might know me from Discord or Moxfield, and today I will give you a rundown of our cEDH Urza primer. First, I will explain to you how the deck functions, how the combos work, and how to close out the game. Then we will go through the single card discussion to see which cards see play and which don't. And after discussing viable options for the list, I will brew a new list that is adapted to a specific meta, and we will also do some mulligans with that list. If you want to skip to any of those parts, I will provide timestamps in the description box below, where you can also find links to the primer, the deck list, and our Discord server. If you have any questions, feel free to ask on the server, on the Moxfield page, or here on YouTube. So without further ado, let's get started. cEDH Urza has two main builds. Those would be Urza Polykraken and Urza Power Scepter. Today we will be focusing on Urza Polykraken, as it's the more widely played version and it's also considered to be the stronger of the two. Don't worry though, I will add a short epilogue about the Power Scepter version as well, as it's the version I prefer to pilot myself. So before we start with a in-depth deck tech, we will have to look at Urza as a commander. Although being in mono blue, Urza is an incredibly busted commander. Not only does he come with a construct friend, he also turns every artifact into a mana rock, allows us to break parity on incredibly strong Stax pieces, and is also an infinite mana outlet. So how do we play Urza in cEDH? In short, our goal is to ramp Urza out, control and stacks the board as much as necessary, and win the game by assembling an infinite mana combo in the mid to late game. But now, let's get into the nitty-gritties. First, let's cover ramp. We want Urza to be on the field as early as turn 1 or turn 2. Turn 3 is almost too slow, and turn 4 isn't even an option. That means we only play the best rocks available to us. Once Urza hits the field, we are in the game. As Urza turns every artifact into a rock, we can now chain cheap artifacts into each other to create a huge board state that buffs our construct and is also a source of mana. Now the fun begins. Once we have a solid board presence, we need to stop faster decks from going off. We do this by playing a lot of cheap counter magic, as well as very specific hate and Stax pieces. This is where your expertise and metagame knowledge comes into play. You need to choose the counter magic and Stax or hate pieces that work well in your meta. We will cover how to choose the right pieces for your meta in the single card discussion later on. Once we were able to stop the faster decks from going off, and we are pulling ahead of our opponents in the mid to late game, we assemble one of 3 infinite mana combos. We either loop mana positive rocks with Hullbreaker Horror, we make infinite mana with Dramatic Reversal imprinted onto an Isochron Scepter and some mana rocks, or we enchant a Grim Monolith with a power artifact. The moment infinite mana is created, there is usually no way to stop Urza from winning the game. You will see that most of your opponents will scoop up as soon as you go infinite. Nevertheless, it is essential for a good pilot to know how to close out the game if an opponent demands to see your lines, especially when there are certain Stax pieces on the board or essential cards have been exiled from your library. Let's assume we have a Urza, Hullbreaker Horror, Lotus Petal, and Pithing Needle in play. In order to start the infinite mana loop, we will need to cast a spell. For this example, I chose Gitaxian Probe. We will cast Gitaxian Probe. With the cast, we will get a Hullbreaker Horror trigger to bounce any non-land permanent into its owner's hand. We will target Lotus Petal, but we will hold priority and tap Lotus Petal for a blue mana through Urza. Lotus Petal will be bounced back into our hand. As you can see, we have a Lotus Petal in hand, 1 blue mana floating, and a Pithing Needle in play. Next, we will cast the Lotus Petal. With a cast trigger, we will target Pithing Needle, but first we will tap it for a blue mana. And then Pithing Needle will be put back into our hand. We will use one of the blue mana to cast Pithing Needle. With a cast trigger, we will target Lotus Petal again, but first we will tap it for a blue mana. And then Lotus Petal will be put back into our hand. As you can see now, we are back where we started. We have a Lotus Petal in hand, a Pithing Needle in play, but now we have 2 mana floating. This means with every iteration of the loop, we will gain 1 blue mana. If you use other rocks, like Soul Ring, you will make colorless mana first. But then, after creating colorless mana, you can filter that mana into blue mana through Urza's activated ability. This means with any 2 artifacts that are mana positive together, we can create infinite colorless and then infinite blue mana. Now that you know how the combo works, let's talk about its pros and cons. I'll start with the pros. Hullbreaker Horror is basically a 1-card combo. It's easily accessible with Polymorph and Proteus Staff, and also easy to hardcast, as Urza ramps incredibly well, and we can flash him in at our last opponent's end step. Additionally, Hullbreaker Horror comes with a built-in protection. Its second triggered ability is basically an unsubstantiate. That means we can use any instant to react to our opponent's interaction. And as if that wasn't already good enough, Hullbreaker Horror can be used to remove pesky Stax pieces that would otherwise hinder us from going off, such as Rule of Law or Drenith Magistrate. Now let's get to the cons. Using Polymorph and Proteus Staff to assemble this combo means we can't play other value creatures, such as Gillidrake. Goodbye. Also, Hullbreaker Horror uses an unsubstantiate effect. That means we can't efficiently stop free or extremely cheap interaction spells, such as Slaughter Pact, or especially Deflecting Swat, as our opponents can just recast them. Overall, this is still our most reliable, resilient, and versatile combo, and therefore usually our main combo plan. Next, we will have a look at the Isochron Scepter plus Dramatic Reversal combo. This combo allows us to tap non-land permanents for mana, which in our case are rocks and artifacts in general, just to untap them again with Dramatic Reversal, creating an infinite mana loop as long as you can produce 3 or more mana from non-land permanents. Let me show you how to sequence this combo. First, you need to be able to generate 3 mana from non-land sources. We can use mana rocks for this, such as Mana Vault, or just any other artifact as long as we have Urza in play. Next, you cast Isochron Scepter and imprint Dramatic Reversal onto it. Now, tap your mana source to float 3 mana. 1, 2, 3. It doesn't matter if the mana is colorless or blue, as we can just filter colorless mana into blue mana once we have made infinite colorless mana, as long as we have Urza in play. Now we use 2 of the 3 floating mana, there's 1 too many, 1, 2, to activate Isochron Scepter and cast Dramatic Reversal. This allows us to untap all of our non-land permanents, including our rocks and Isochron Scepter itself. As you can see, we are now back where we started, but we have 1 colorless mana floating. Repeat this process for infinite colorless mana. Once you have made infinite colorless mana, just tap your artifact for a blue mana through Urza. Now use 2 of your infinite colorless mana to activate Isochron Scepter again. This will allow you to untap your mana sources as well as Isochron Scepter, leaving you with 1 blue mana floating. You can repeat this process to filter your infinite colorless mana into infinite blue mana. Let's get to the pros and cons of this combo. Opposed to Hullbreaker Horror, this is a 2-card combo, but it consists of an artifact and an instant, both of which are easy to tutor for in mono blue. As you can see on the left, we have an abundance of tutors for both pieces. The combo is also very cheap to cast, and both pieces have value outside the combo. For example, Isochron Scepter can be imprinted with counter magic to slow down the game, and Dramatic Reversal can be used as a pseudo-ritual to hardcast Hullbreaker Horror. Another great thing is that having non-land permanents that produce 3 mana comes very natural to the deck. However, this combo is fairly susceptible to hate and of course removal, as it does not come with built-in protection like Hullbreaker. You can see the most common hate pieces that can hinder us from going off on the right. Drenith Magistrate won't allow us to cast the imprinted Dramatic Reversal from exile. Collector Oof and Nullrod stop us from activating Isochron Scepter, while Linvala and Cursed Totem stop us from using Urza to tap artifacts for mana or as an infinite mana outlet. Rule of Law effects also completely stop this combo, but taxing effects like Thalia are rather easy to deal with. We just need to create excess mana to pay for the tax. With all the artifacts we play, that's rarely an issue. So overall, this combo is easy to assemble, cheap to cast, and the requirements to go off come very natural to the deck. Unfortunately though, this combo is also fairly susceptible to hate, which is why it's only our Plan B combo. Finally, we have the Grim Monolith plus Power Artifact combo. This combo is fairly simple. We cast a Grim Monolith and enchant it with a Power Artifact. This will reduce the cost of Grim Monolith untap ability from 4 to 2 colorless mana. Since Grim Monolith can tap for 3 colorless mana and untap itself for 2 colorless mana, we can create infinite colorless mana. Tap Grim Monolith for 3 colorless mana, 1, 2, 3, and untap it for 2 colorless mana, 1, 2. As you can see, we are now back where we started, but have 1 colorless mana floating. Repeat this process for infinite colorless mana. Now, tap your Grim Monolith through Urza's activated ability to create a blue mana. Use 2 of your infinite colorless mana to untap the Grim Monolith again. Repeat this process to filter all your infinite colorless mana into infinite blue mana. Let's get to the pros and cons of this combo. As you can see, it is also a 2-card combo, just like the Scepter reversal one. But what makes it worse is that we can't efficiently tutor up Power Artifact. Mono Blue just does not have any enchantment tutors. Our most reliable way to get Power Artifact is a Muddle the Mixture, which we can transmute into Power Artifact. You can go for Narset's Reversal on an opponent's tutor, or use Intuition to tutor up your missing combo pieces. But that's really suboptimal. Another important point is the fact that Power Artifact is a pure combo piece. It has basically no value outside of that. The combo is also susceptible to artifact and enchantment removal, such as Nature's Claim, as well as artifact hate, such as Collector Oath or Nullrod. However, the combo does go past Rule of Law effects, as you can just cast the pieces in subsequent turns, and you can go infinite in your opponent's turn. This strategy is even more viable since the printing of Hullbreaker Horror, which we can flash in during our opponent's turn. Furthermore, taxing effects like Thalia do not affect this combo a lot, as it's not storm-based. Overall, this makes Power Monolith our third combo, which we can kind of stumble into or specifically go for in very certain situations. After creating infinite mana, we need to be able to present a wincon. But as a matter of fact, cEDH Urza lists do not play actual wincons. We do not play Oracle, we do not play Lapman, nor Jace, and we definitely do not play Aetherflux Reservoir or Walking Ballista. Like I said, we do in fact not play any wincons. Why is that, you might ask? Well, wincons are usually really bad cards that serve only one purpose. With the limited card pool we have access to as a mono blue deck, we need to maximize card quality. This includes not playing unnecessary wincons. This, however, leads us to the most asked question for cEDH Urza. How do we win the game after making infinite mana? The short answer: we dump mana into Urza, gain access to our whole library, and from there we create a board state that is literally unbeatable and will win us the game within one turn cycle at the very most. The long answer can become quite a bit more complex, and you need to know your deck well enough to guarantee a win every single time you go infinite. Let me explain the basic steps. Step 0. You go infinite and dump all your mana into Urza's activated ability, exiling almost all of your library. You will leave a few cards in your library in order to not die to effects like Cephalid Colosseum. Then we can start. Step 1. Bounce all of your opponent's non-permanents with either Hullbreaker Horror or by looping a bounce spell such as Cyclonic Rift. Step 2. Wheel twice with Narset Part of Veils on the board to make all of your opponents hellbent. Step 3. Cast all of your Stax pieces. Step 4. Create infinite Swan and or construct tokens by either looping Swan Song or bouncing Urza and recasting him. Step 5. Tutor up a hand full of interaction and pass the turn. Step 6. Counter everything your opponents do on their turns. Step 7. Swing for lethal damage on your turn. Was that too fast? Let's go a bit more into detail. Before I sequence out a win, it's important for you to understand what exactly a loop is and how we perform such a loop. A loop in MTG is a situation in which we can repeat a certain action over and over again, while changing the game state. For example, sequence spells and abilities in a way that allow us to cast a spell over and over again. So, how do we do this in Urza? Well, there are 4 ways to do this. The first loop you already know uses Hullbreaker Horror. Once we make infinite mana using 2 rocks like Lotus Petal and Chromox, we can substitute one of the rocks with another permanent, like Urza, Lord High Artificer. We cast Chromox and bounce Urza back into our hand. We then use our infinite mana to recast Urza and bounce Chromox. On ETB, Urza will create a construct token. We then recast Chromox in order to bounce Urza. We recast Urza and bounce Chromox, creating another construct token. We can repeat this process an infinite amount of times in order to create infinite construct tokens, each being infinitely big in order to swing at our opponents. We can also substitute Urza with Narset Part of Veils. While she doesn't have an ETB effect, she has a downtick ability, which allows us to look at the top 4 cards of our library and put a non-land, non-creature card into our hand. We can use this loop to put her into play, downtick her, bounce her, put her into play, downtick her in order to go through our whole library without ever using Urza's activated ability. This is especially useful in a situation in which we can't get rid of a Drannith Magistrate. The second loop is played in some form or another in a lot of cEDH decks. It's called a twister loop. In order to perform a twister loop, we need a few things. First, we need infinite blue mana. For this example, I chose Monolith and Power Artifact, creating infinite colorless and then infinite blue mana through Urza. We need infinite card draw, or in our case, infinite exile through Urza's activated ability. We need a spell we want to loop. For our example, I chose Cyclonic Rift. We also need Time Twister and Narset's Reversal. Let's assume all the 3 cards we need are in our library. We will activate Urza and flip cards until we have access to all the 3 cards I just mentioned. We will now cast Cyclonic Rift from exile, bouncing an opponent's permanent. We will then cast Time Twister. We will hold priority and cast Narset's Reversal. Narset's Reversal resolves. It will create a copy of Time Twister, and it will put the original Time Twister back in our hand. Now the copied Time Twister resolves, shuffling the original Time Twister, Narset's Reversal, and Cyclonic Rift back into our library. As you can see, we are now back where we started. We cast Cyclonic Rift, and now have access to all 3 cards again if we activate Urza's ability. We can repeat this process in order to loop any spell we want that goes to the graveyard. Not only Cyclonic Rift, but also other spells like Removal or something like Ether Spellbomb, which also goes to the graveyard and therefore can be looped with a twister loop. The third and less often played loop is called a dual Scepter loop. In order to pull this off, you will need an Isochron Scepter with an dramatic reversal imprinted onto it. We will use the Isochron Scepter in any rock available in order to create infinite colorless and then infinite blue mana. Once we have infinite blue mana, we will cast a copy artifact, imprinting a Nasset's reversal onto it. With the dual scepters, we will now be able to loop any instant or sorcery. For this example, I chose Cyclonic Rift again. We will cast the Cyclonic Rift. We will hold priority and activate the second Isochron Scepter in order to cast a Nasset's reversal. Nasset's reversal will resolve, a Cyclonic Rift will be put into our hand, and a copy will be put onto the stack. Once the copy resolves, we will be able to bounce a permanent our opponent controls. We will then activate the first Isochron Scepter in order to untap both Isochron Scepters. As you can see, we are now back where we started, but we have bounced a permanent. We can now repeat this process in order to bounce every non-land permanent our opponents control. This is not limited to Cyclonic Rift, of course. We can also loop any removal spell or any other instant or sorcery. Let's use the dual scepter loop in order to create infinite Swan tokens. In order to do that, we will need Swan Song, as well as a spell that can be countered by Swan Song, like Cyclonic Rift. Let's play this out. We will cast Cyclonic Rift. We will hold priority and cast Swan Song, targeting Cyclonic Rift. We will hold priority and activate the second Isochron Scepter in order to cast Nasset's Reversal, targeting the Swan Song. We will put a copy of Swan Song on the stack and bounce the original back into our hand. We will hold priority and activate the first Isochron Scepter in order to untap both. We will hold priority in order to cast Swan Song, targeting the copied Swan Song. We will then activate the second Isochron Scepter to cast Nasset's Reversal, targeting the Swan Song that's on top. Will be put back into our hand, and we will put a copied Swan Song on top of our stack. We will activate the first Isochron Scepter to untap both Isochron Scepters again. We can now repeat this process in order to create a stack that has infinite copied Swan Songs on it. Once the stack resolves, like in this example, every second card will be countered, like this and like this. The others, however, will resolve, giving us infinite Swan tokens. The fourth loop I will present today is a variation of the dual scepter loop. However, this loop will not allow us to loop any instant or sorcery as often as we want. It will only allow us to loop one instant as often as we want, and that instant has to be able to be imprinted onto an Isochron Scepter. For this example, I chose Swan Song. So, what else do we need? Well, of course, we need the copy artifact in order to create another Isochron Scepter. We will imprint the Swan Song onto it. In order to start the loop, we will need to cast a spell that can be countered by Swan Song, like Cyclonic Rift. We will cast Cyclonic Rift, hold priority, and activate the second Isochron Scepter in order to cast Swan Song. We will put a Swan Song on the stack, which is represented by this Swan token. We will then activate the first Isochron Scepter in order to untap both Isochron Scepters. With the Swan Song still on the stack, we will activate the second Isochron Scepter again in order to put another Swan Song on the stack, targeting the first. We will hold priority, activate the Isochron Scepter to untap both. We can now repeat this process in order to put an infinite amount of Swan Songs on the stack. Just like I explained before, Swan Song will resolve and counter the copied Swan Song underneath. This will lead to every second spell to be countered, but every other will resolve, thus giving us an infinite amount of Swan tokens. Now that you know how to create infinite mana and how to loop spells, I will give you an example of how to sequence a win without an actual win con. We will assume that we have a minimum board state of only 2 islands, drew a Monolith and Power Artifact to create infinite mana. We will use this mana to activate Urza's last ability and flip cards from our library into exile. We will present these cards right here. Let's start. Island, Personal Tutor. Naset, Pato fails. We will cast her. Continue. Mox Diamond. Windfall. We will keep this card in mind because it's important later on. Topo Op. We will cast it. Copy Artifact. We will keep this card in mind for later. Fierce Guardianship. Flusterstorm. Back to basics. We will cast it. Islands. Mana Drain. War Room. Dramatic Reversal. We will keep this card in mind for later. Rhystic Study. We will cast it. Brainstorm. Mystic Sanctuary. Island. Eye of Vecna. We will cast it. We'll immediately draw a card and lose 2 life. Continue with Urza activations. Isochron Scepter. We will keep this card in mind for later. Continue. Relic of Progenitors. We will cast this. Jeweled Amulet. Cast. Winds of Rebuke. Keep this card in mind for later. Winterall. Cast. Preordain. Emergence Zone. Counterspell. Sapphire Medallion. We will cast this. Force of Will. Ether Spellbomb. Cast. Force of Negation. Merchant Scroll. We will cast Merchant Scroll, put in the graveyard, and tutor up an instant. We will use Narset's Reversal. As soon as we find it, of course. There it is. We'll put Narset's Reversal into our hand and shuffle our library. We will now cast Isochron Scepter from exile. We will react by casting Dramatic Reversal from exile. We will hold priority and cast Narset's Reversal, targeting the Dramatic Reversal. Narset's Reversal goes to the graveyard, Dramatic Reversal goes into our hand, a copy is put on the stack and resolves. We still have the Isochron ETB trigger, but now Dramatic Reversal is in our hand, so we can imprint it, which is what we do. We now have the Isochron Scepter Dramatic Reversal combo assembled. We will continue to activate Urza. Fabricate. Mystic Remora. Cast. Soul Ring. Cast. Hullbreaker Horror. At this point, we will cast Hullbreaker Horror. We will now activate Isochron Scepter with Dramatic Reversal an infinite amount of times, and with every spell we cast, we will be able to bounce an opponent's non-land permanent. This will allow us to bounce everything our opponents have on board except for lands. So at this point, our opponents will only have lands on their board and a huge hand size. Now what we need to do is get rid of all the cards they have in their hand. So we will continue. Sculpt, Sculling Tarn, Polluted Delta, Arkham's Astrolabe. We will cast it. Draw a card. Activate Urza again. Quick shuffle. Continue. Urza's Bauble. Cast. Tezzeret the Seeker. Cast. Solve the Equation. We will cast Solve the Equation to tutor up Time Twister into our hand. Time Twister. At this point, we have Time Twister in hand, and as you can remember, we have a Windfall in our graveyard. We will now use the Time Twister. This will allow us to shuffle our graveyard and our hand back into our library and let us draw 7 new cards. So we will do that. Time Twister goes to the graveyard. We will shuffle up and draw 7 new cards. However, as there is a non-set pot of Veils on the board, our opponents will only draw 1 card each. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We will cast everything we need to cast from this hand. Lotus Petal, Mox Opal, and Chrome Mox. We will continue. We will cast Copy Artifact from Exile in order to copy the Isotron Scepter. Onto the Isotron Scepter we will imprint a Swan Song, which we have just drawn. As you can remember, this will now allow us to make infinite Swan tokens. We are still not finished here. We still have a Windfall in exile. We will cast this Windfall. We will have to discard our hand, which is 1, 2, 3 cards, and we will draw 3 new cards, as our opponents only have 1 card. 1, 2, 3. However, as there is an asset pot of Veils on board, our opponents will draw 0 cards, which leaves them hellbent. So let's think about this again. They have only lands on the board, and they are now hellbent. We have the option to create infinite mana. We have the option to create infinite Swan tokens. And as we have a Hullbreaker horror on board and enough artifacts and infinite mana, we can now loop an artifact and Urza to create infinite construct tokens. We will also create infinite Swan tokens. As you can see, this is our graveyard, and these are all the cards we have in exile. This is our library. If we pass the turn right now, our opponents will only be able to cast the card they draw and cast their commanders. So we will need to stop them. We can do this with Hullbreaker Horror. As we have infinite spell casts, we can also infinitely bounce everything our opponents casts. We can also just counter it with Swan Song. So at this point, we can safely pass the turn, counter everything our opponents do, come back to our turn, and then swing for lethal with infinite Swan and infinite construct tokens. So let's now sequence another win from another board state. In this example, we have created infinite mana by using Sol Ring and Mishra's Bauble inside a Hullbreaker Horror loop in order to create infinite colorless and then infinite blue mana. We will now replace Mishra's Bauble with Urza Lord High Artificer and continue the loop with Sol Ring in order to create infinite construct tokens, each being infinitely big. The only thing we now need to do is bounce our opponent's non-land permanents, make them hellbent, and control whatever they cast in order to be able to swing for lethal on our next turn. So let's try to do that. We will produce infinite mana, or we have infinite mana, and we will dump that into Urza's activated ability and start flipping cards. So activate it for the first time, we'll do a quick shuffle with this, and then we start flipping. Tezzeret. So with every spell we cast, we will be able to bounce a permanent our opponents have in play, a non-land permanent. It's an island, it's a brainstorm, don't really need that, just continue flipping till we find what we need. You can cast the Proteus Staff, bounce another permanent, back to basics, Fabricate, do we need that? Yeah, we can use the Fabricate to get an Isotron Scepter into our hand. Again, bouncing another permanent. There it is, so Isotron Scepter is now in our hand. It's not really important, but we can do this while activating Urza. Shuffle again, and then continue with flipping cards through Urza's activated ability. Nasset's Reversal. This is an exile now, so we need to keep this in mind. So we put it aside. Continue flipping. Intuition, Cephalid Colosseum, Relic of Progenitors. This card I'm testing right now, we can cast that, bounce another permanent. Urza Saga, Misty Rainforest, Island, Swan Song. So this could come in handy, so we'll put this aside. Island, Personal Tutor, Adventure Sphere, Resculpt. This could also come in handy in order to remove pesky creatures or artifacts, but we don't need that right now, as we can just bounce everything. Recurring Insight, we could cast this in order to bounce something, draw some more cards, but we don't really need to do that right now, so we will just continue flipping cards. Pithing Needle, cast. Mull the Mixture, don't need that right now. Mox Opal, cast. So Windfall. We could use the Windfall later, so we will put this aside. Continue. Mystic Remora, cast, bounce another permanent. Jeweled Amulet, bounce another permanent. Dispel. So solve the equation. We will cast this and tutor up Dramatic Reversal. Where is it? There it is. So shuffle up. We will now cast the Isochron Scepter from our hand and imprint Dramatic Reversal. Not only do we now have infinite mana, we also have infinite untaps and infinite spellcast through Dramatic Reversal with Isochron Scepter. So we can now effectively bounce all of our opponent's non-land permanents. So at this point, they do have no permanents in play except for lands. So the next thing we need to do is make them hellbent in order to be free for combat. So let's continue flipping cards. It's a Mana Vault, we can just cast that. Sensei's Top, Toll for Orb, could come in handy. Mystical Tutor. Jeweled Lotus, just cast it. So there we have Narset. We will just cast Narset. We can now use Hullbreaker Horror and any permanent we have in play to basically loop Narset, Part of Veils, and go through the top 4 cards of our library step by step. This will allow us to put any non-land, non-creature card from our library into our hand. So we will do this right now. I will present a loop where I bounce Narset, cast her, downtick her, bounce her back to my hand, cast her, downtick her, to go through the top 4 cards of my library every iteration of the loop. So everything that's left in the library will be lands and creatures. And as we don't play any creatures, the only thing left in the library will be lands. So we can now just put all the lands out. So at this point, my library consists of only these cards, which are all lands. I have a Narset in play, and all of these cards, so this is in play, this is my graveyard, this is my exile zone, and these are all the cards I have in my hand. I can now do a lot of things. So I could, for example, do a Twister loop. Let's see where the Twister is. Somewhere right here. There it is. I could perform a Twister loop with Time Twister and Narset's Reversal, which is an exile, in order to, for example, loop Swan Song. I could also just loop Winds of Rebuke, another card I'm testing right now, in order to mill my opponents out and have them die on their draw step. I could also cast an Overloaded Cyclonic Rift if I need to get rid of something that has hexproof. With all this, I can now bounce. I have now bounced all my opponent's permanents. I can cast Time Twister once, do another Twister loop with Narset's Reversal, and by this point I will have wheeled twice and my opponents will have 0 cards in hand because of Narset Part of Veils. I have a Hullbreaker Horror in play, so all I need to do is just keep a few instants in my hand. Could be Winds of Rebuke, Cyclonic Rift, Mental Misstep, Force, Weir of Invention, Flusterstorm. Doesn't even need to be a counterspell, it just needs to be an instant, Memory Deluge, Fierce Guardianship, Delay, and Pact of Negation. I can discard all of these cards because I don't really need them right now. I could cast them, like, of course, a Trinisphere is never a bad cast when you have infinite mana. Now I just need to keep 7 cards in hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Discard the rest. And I can now safely pass the turn with a lot of interaction in hand, with a Hullbreaker Horror that's also interaction when I cast any instant. And I will go to my next turn, draw a card, which will be a land. As you know, we only have lands in our library. And then I can swing for lethal with my infinitely big construct tokens. That's about it. That's how you perform a win without an actual win con in the deck. In our last 2 examples, we sequenced out a win by performing spell loops. For this example, I choose to perform a win without using a spell loop. So we exile Hullbreaker Horror, Isochron Scepter, Time Twister, and Narset's Reversal from our library. We will now perform a win without ever looping a single spell or permanent. We have infinite mana through Grim Monolith and Power Artifact. We have Urza in play as well as a construct. Let's start. We activate Urza's ability, do a quick shuffle, and start flipping cards. What we need to do right now is get rid of our opponent's boards, cast almost all of our artifacts, put Tezzeret in play, Narset in play, and wheel once so our opponents only have 1 card in hand. We can't make them completely hellbent, but we can get them very close to it. So let's start. Ponder. Keep that in mind for later. Mana Vault. We will cast it. Transmute Artifact. We'll keep this in mind for later. Snowcover Island. Sculling Torn. Island. Solve the equation. We will now cast Solve the Equation in order to put Cyclonic Rift into our hand. There it is. We will do a quick shuffle. This 1, 2, 3. Put Cyclonic Rift into our hand, and we will now cast an overloaded Cyclonic Rift. So we've successfully wiped the board of all our opponent's non-land permanents. Let's continue flipping cards. Muddle the Mixture. Heuristic Study. We will cast it. Recurring Insight. We will cast it. As our opponents have just got bounced all of their non-land permanents into our hand, this will draw us around like 5 to 10 cards, so let's draw 5 cards. 1, 2, 3, 5. We'll draw 5 cards. And we can just cast these. So that's a Mystic Remora, Jeweled Amulet, Back to Basics, and Arkham's Astrolabe, which will draw us another card, and a Copy Artifact, which will be another Arkham's Astrolabe and draw us another card. Okay, so these are 2 lands. We don't need this, so we can put this aside. Let's continue flipping cards with Urza. Do a quick shuffle. And continue. Force of Will. Mana Drain. Miscast. Mindbreak Trap. Resculpt. Sensei's Top. Cast. Mana Crypt. Cast. Trinisphere. Cast. Mox Opal. Ether Spellbomb. Memory Deluge, we don't need that. Dramatic Reversal. This will come in handy later, so we will put this to the side. Snowcarved Island. Prismatic Vista, Chromox, cast it. Soul Ring, cast. Fierce Guardianship. Proteus Staff. So this will be important later on, so we'll put it into play directly. And continue. We can now cast the Mox Diamonds and ditch one of the lands we have in hand. Continue. Relic, just cast it. Sapphire Medallion, put in play. Personal Tutor, this will come in handy later on, so we will just put it aside. Everflowing Chalice. Lotus Petal. I have Vecna, we will put this aside. No, actually we will just cast the Personal Tutor and put Windfall on top of our library. There it is, we will shuffle. We will then cast Eye of Vecna, lose 2 life, and draw a card. We now have Windfall in our hand. This is important, so we will put it aside and continue flipping cards. Quick shuffle and flip. So there we have Narset. This is what we were looking for. We will now put Narset into play and cast a Windfall. Our opponents will only be able to draw 1 card because of Narset, and we will draw a bunch of cards because our opponents have a very huge hand size as we just bounced their board. So we will draw, let's say, 5 more cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so what we're going to do next, we're going to cast the Pithing Needle, we're going to cast the Torpor Orb, and we are going to continue flipping cards of Urza. Winter Orb. Snooker Island, I need that. Preordain, could come in handy. Rear of Invention, don't need that. Static Orb. Wounds of Rebuke, this could come in handy. Snooker Island, Pact of Negation, Urza's Bauble. There it is, Tezzeret the Seeker. So what do we do now? We have a very cool trick we can do right now. So we will activate Proteus Staff and put Urza on the bottom of our library. We will now flip cards from the top of our library until we flip into another creature. As we don't play any other creatures, we will flip right back into Urza. This will allow us to create another construct token, and as we just went through our whole library, we can stack it back in any order we want, thanks to Proteus Staff's effect. So we can now put interaction on top of our library. So as you can see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of interaction on top of my library. I can now cast Dramatic Reversal and do the same thing with Proteus Staff again to create another construct token. I can now use Winds of Rebuke in order to do the same thing again. I will bounce Proteus Staff back to my hand, mill 2 cards. Well, 2 counter spells, not too important. I will cast Proteus Staff again, activate it, go through my deck again, create another construct token with Urza. I will then uptick Tezzeret and untap the Proteus Staff again and do the same thing again, creating another construct token. Like this. So as you can see, we can create a bunch of construct tokens without ever looping any spell. We just need to be smart about the spells we have. We have Tezzeret upticked to 5. So that means on our next turn, if he is well protected, we can create an army of 5/5 artifact tokens. As you can see, we have a lot of artifacts in play. So this is the army we're going to use to beat down our opponents. Remember, they have only 1 card in hand. They have literally no board state. They are under a ton of Stax pieces, Static Orb, Winter Orb, Torpor Orb, Pithing Needle, and so on. We have a Back to Basics in play, 2 draw engines, and as you know, we have interaction on top of our library. We can also now go through the cards we were missing. For example, we have a Swan Song, so we can cast any spell, like a Preordain, counter it with a Swan Song to create a Swan, which will also protect our Tezzeret for the next turn. At this point, we can safely pass the turn, as our opponents have no boards and only 1 card in hand. We have ways to draw the top card of our library with Mystic Remora and Heuristic Study, as well as the Brainstorm we have in hand, in order to protect ourselves on our opponent's turn. And when we come back to our turn, we will draw a card. And then we will ultimate Tezzeret to create a huge army of constructs, as well as our 5 construct tokens, and swing for lethal damage. Well, and that's how you perform a win without the most important cards that you need to loop. You guys know how to play the deck, how to combo, and how to sequence a win. We will have a look at the single card discussion. The single card discussion in the primer is split into different sections. We have lands right here, ramp, draw, tutor, counter magic, control and sex, that's everything that's not counter magic, the combo package, and budget replacements. Today we will not look at the budget replacements. If you want to look at those, please follow the link in the description box below. So let's start with lands. As a mono blue deck, we generally want to play mostly basic islands. This makes effects like Back to Basics even stronger, and we are not affected by effects like Blood Moon or Archon of Emeria. However, there are a few lands we want to play as they help us with our general game plan. Those would be Ancient Tube, as it's basically ramp, Flooded Strand as a fetch and shuffle effect, Gemstone Caverns, which is also basically ramp, Inventor Sphere, which is a tutor, brings us artifacts into our hand, like Stax pieces or combo pieces. Mystic Sanctuary, which is fetchable, because it's an island, and it also makes for very interesting and strong intuition piles, and it can also be used as a, basically, recursion effect. Then we have the other fetch lands, Misty Rainforest, Polluted Delta, Scalding Tarn, all the snow-covered islands, and yes, it's true, snow-covered islands make blue mana better than regular islands. Yeah, you actually don't need to play snow-covered islands. We only play them because we are on Arcrim's Astrolabe, which is a pretty strong card, and I strongly suggest you play it. And then, of course, we have Urza Saga, which is quite a new addition to the deck. It's a staple, and it will be. You should definitely play it. It's really strong. It gets us 2 new constructs, which makes beatdown plans even more viable, and it replaces itself when you sacrifice it with a 0 or 1 CMC artifact, which is incredible. So then there are a few other cards or non-basic lands you can play. Currently I am on Cephalid Colosseum, which is pretty easy include. It taps for blue mana, it deals 1 damage, which is hardly relevant, and with the threshold effect you can stop Turbo Noir decks that win via Thassa's Oracle combo by having them draw 3 cards. We are also on Emergence Zone, as it allows us to go off an instant speed on our opponent's turn, maybe even on top of an opponent's win con. We have Prismatic Vista, which is also a fetch land. It only gets basic lands, so you can't grab Mystic Sanctuary, but it's also still pretty good as a fetch and shuffle effect. Then we have Tabernacle at the Pendrel Vale, which is a land, but mainly played as a Stax piece. It's a meta call, but it's really strong in Urza as we don't play a lot of creatures. Then we also have War Room, which in my opinion is a pretty good land. It lets you draw another card every turn for only taking 1 damage. We usually don't have issues with paying the mana cost for the activation, and it's a nice little draw engine to have in Staxy situations. Of course, there are other notable options you could choose from. There's Academy Ruins, which is a recursion effect. We have Blast Zone, which is a very hard to interact with removal effect. We have Boseiju, who shelters all, which can protect your polymorph or even your recurring insight. Then we have City of Traitors, which is basically a ritual which allows you to get Urza out earlier. The drawback is minimal, but I'm currently not on it as I like the consistency of not having to sacrifice a land. We also have Crystal Vein, which is pretty similar to City of Traitors in my opinion. I used to play this one. I'm personally a fan, but you definitely don't have to. It's more consistent, can use it for colorless mana every time you want to, and if you sacrifice it, you get 2 colorless mana. So in the situations you want to ramp, you can use it, but you don't have to. We have Cypress and Scary, which is a blue depletion land. It comes into play with 2 depletion counters. It comes into play tapped, which makes it kind of slow, but it taps for 2 blue, which is really nice. We have a lot of rocks that produce colorless mana, but Scepter and Scary helps us to produce the 2 blue mana we need to cast Urza ahead of curve. It's not a must, but some lists play it. I like it, I used to play it, I'm not on it currently. And then we have Tolaria West, which is a really nice card. It comes into play tapped, and it taps for blue mana, but it can be transmuted, so it's basically a modal dual-face card. So you can tutor up a card with 0 CMC, which can be a rock like Mana Crypt, but it can also be Pact of Negation, or it can be any of these utility lands. For example, a Tabernacle. So if you are in a situation where your opponents have a lot of creatures on board and you want to get rid of those, transmuting a Tolaria West into a Tabernacle at the Pendrell Vale is a really nice line. Of course, we also have lands that some people want to play but are really bad options, so those would be Seed of the Synod, as well as Darksteel Citadel. Why is that, you might ask? We are an artifact-heavy deck, why don't we want to play artifact lands? Well, they are susceptible to artifact hate, such as Collector Oof, so we don't want our land base to be affected by Collector Oof if we can't use our artifacts for mana, and that's why we do not play these lands. Another land some people want to play in Urza, but that's also not a really good idea, is Mishra's Workshop. Yes, it taps for 3 colorless mana, which we can use to cast an artifact, but there are 2 main issues with that. First, our artifacts aren't that expensive to cast, so we don't really need the mana, and we also do not play as much artifacts as you might think, and in the later parts of the game, this is pretty much a dead draw. And it numbles with back to basics, so we also don't really want that. Let's go to the next section, which is ramp. Almost all Urza lists I know play the same rocks. Some variation, but like minimal. What we need to think about with rocks is that every rock we play needs to be able to allow us to get Urza on the field ahead of curve. So we only play the best rocks that are available to us. There will be Chrome rocks. Copy Artifact is basically a rock. We can use it for other stuff, but it's very often played as a copy of someone else's Mana Crypt. We have Everflowing Chalice. Then of course Monolith. It's a staple, it's a mana positive rock, and it's also a combo piece. We have Jeweled Amulet, a highly underrated rock in my opinion. It can store blue mana, which can help us to cast Urza on turn 2 if we don't have a land drop. We have Jeweled Lotus, which allows us to cast Urza on turn 1. Of course, Lotus Petal, mana positive, Mana Crypt, also mana positive, Mana Vault, Mox Diamond, Mox Opal, also all mana positives, Soul Ring, also mana positive, and then we have Sapphire Medallion, which reduces the cost of blue spells, makes everything we do cheaper, and also Urza cheaper, and helps us to cast them ahead of curve. These are all the core cards, and also all the current inclusions. I wouldn't know of many Urza lists that play different rocks, but there are some rocks that some people want to play, and we advise against them, and those would be Arcane Signet, or stuff like Fellwash Stone. Any 2 CMC rock will not really help us to cast Urza ahead of curve. We have much better options, and at the point where you can cast these and have Urza in play, they're pretty much dead cards. You can use any other artifact. It will also tap for mana when you have Urza in play, and it also might have a utility like Eye of Vecna, which will draw your card every turn. Then there's also Lineside Diamond. You might think that this would be a good inclusion in Urza, but the main issue is that mono blue decks really lack graveyard strategies, so we can't efficiently make use of the discarded cards, and therefore this is not worth playing in Urza. And then we have Mox Amber. A lot of people think this would be a good inclusion in Urza, but it's definitely not. So this is probably the worst rock you can play in Urza. It's a 0 CMC legendary artifact that taps for mana of the color of legendary creatures and planeswalkers you control. But the issue is, before you have Urza in play, this taps for 0 mana. And once you have Urza in play, it taps for blue mana because of Urza. But when Urza is in play, any artifact taps for blue mana. So instead of playing Mox Amber, you could play stuff like Welding Jar, which is a 0 CMC artifact, but also has a utility effect. Or you could even play Darksteel Relic, which is a 0 CMC artifact that does nothing but is indestructible. All of these would be better options than Mox Amber. So if you're playing Mox Amber in Urza, you are wrong. It's as simple as that. Okay, let's go to the draw section. These will be our staples. We have Arkham's Astrolabe. It's a snow permanent that will draw as a card and filter mana. This is a really nice card. It allows us to draw the deck in a Hullbreaker horror loop. It will filter early rock mana, colorless rock mana, into colored mana to help us cast spells with more than one pip. Then we have the staples, Brainstorm, Gitaxian Probe, Mishra's Bauble, which is also basically a draw spell. Of course, Mystic Remora, Ponder, Preordain. I'm personally a huge fan of cantrips, of cheap draw spells. Not everybody is on these, but most people are. We have Recurring Insight, which is a very high impact draw spell, so it usually draws between 5 and 10 cards depending on the board state, and it has a rebound effect, so it will draw cards on the second turn without paying mana. Usually, if Recurring Insight goes through and you have the second Recurring Insight copy go through as well, that's a game ending, because you draw so many cards you will easily be able to assemble a win con. We have Rhystic Study, of course, Sensei's Divining Top, which is really good in mid-rangey decks. Then we have the Time Twister, which is also a combo piece. Of course, Urza's Bauble, also 0 CMC artifact, taps for mana, and can replace itself if you sacrifice it. And then we have Windfall. Currently, I included Dig Through Time into the list, as well as Eye of Vecna, but there are other options like Impulse. I really like this. I think of this as a baby Dig Through Time. It doesn't dig as deep, but it's very reliable, only costs 2 mana, and it works with a non-existing graveyard, so that's great. Then we have Memory Deluge, which in my opinion is something that's right between Impulse and Dig Through Time. The fun thing about this is that you can reuse it with a flashback ability, so it's really nice to have. And we have Paradoxical Outcome. This is one of the more interesting draw spells. It's an instant, which is nice, but it also needs you to put non-land permanents back into your hand. That can come in handy. So, for example, in a situation where there's a board wipe, or everything gets bounced from an Overlord or Cyclonic Rift, you can just put your cards back into your hand and then draw off of them. What makes it not so good is that in situations with a Rhystic Study in play, with a Fish in play, or with a Rule of Law effect in play, which are really common right now, you will bounce cards back into your hand, but you won't be able to rebuild your board. And as Urza is a deck that plays to the board, so usually we have a huge board state and not a huge hand size, this is kind of suboptimal at the moment, but it's definitely a reasonable include. Then we have Seagate Restoration. A lot of people call this a basically free include. I currently do not play it. I know that a few people do. It's reasonable. I don't really like the front side. I think the front side is too bad to play, and I'm not the fan that the backside is a non-basic land that's not an island, so we can't fetch it. Not a huge fan. You can flip into it with Urza, which is really unreliable, and you shouldn't include a card just because of that. But it's also very easily included by just cutting another basic or non-basic. Then we have Cyllene Visions, which is pretty similar. It also is an instant on the front side, so you can dig into your library, get a polymorph, get a Time Twister, anything like that. And an island on the backside, or not an island, but a land on the backside that taps for blue. We also have Time Spiral. We used to be on this, it used to be a staple, but it isn't anymore. It was cut when Hullbreaker was still legal, because it's just too expensive, and there usually wasn't a time where you could cast it where there wasn't a Hullbreacher in play. But what we noticed is that it isn't really necessary. So you could use it to do Twister Loops, but you don't really need to do that. As I mentioned before, you don't actually really need to loop anything in order to win. And therefore this was cut for a more efficient draw spell, cheaper to cast draw spell. Let's get to the tutors. So what do we have? We have Intuition, which is a cEDH staple. Of course, we can't really make use of our graveyard, but there are some interesting Intuition piles you can do with Mystic Sanctuary and with fetch lands, so it kind of works pretty well. You can also grab all your combo pieces in a situation where you just need one of them and don't care which one you get. We also have Merchant Scroll, Tutor's Counter Magic, as well as Dramatic Reversal. We have Muddle the Mixture, which is actually a counterspell, but you can transmute it to get any CMC2 card. Could be Isochron Scepter, Dramatic Reversal, Narset's Reversal, or Power Artifact, for example. We have Mystical Tutor, another staple in cEDH. We have Personal Tutor. This one doesn't see that much play because it's pretty slow, so it's a 1 mana sorcery that puts a sorcery on top of your library. You can get Time Twister with that. You can get Polymorph, of course. It's pretty slow, but it works well when you play cantrips like Ponder, Preordain, and all the others. Yeah, then we have Polymorph. It's not really a tutor, but we use it to tutor up Hullbreaker Horror, so in that sense, it is a tutor for us. Same goes for Proteus Staff. Then we have Solve the Equation. It's quite a new include, but yeah, in Mono Blue you don't have that many choices, so we take what we can get. It's a 3-mana sorcery that tutors instants or sorceries, so we can grab anything we need. Then we have Tezzeret the Seeker, just as the name says, he seeks up artifacts. We use this to tutor up an artifact into play, so it can't be countered, but he's also a win-con with his ultimate. We have Transmute Artifact. It's probably the best artifact tutor in the deck. You pay 2, sacrifice an artifact, tutor up another artifact into play. It can't be countered. You just need to pay the mana difference between those 2 artifacts. And then we have Weir of Invention, another really nice artifact tutor. It's an instant. You pay 3 blue and X. X is the CMC of the artifact you want to put into play. It's really nice because you can do that in instant speed on your opponent's turn or on top of your opponent's win attempt to get, for example, an Icecrown Scepter into play and combo off. I also currently play Fabricate. I'm a big fan of this card, so you can pay 3 mana to drop another rock, put it directly into play or anything, like a Mana Crypt to ramp, or you can just grab a combo piece. Notable options would be Bribery. We used to play this when Hullbreaker was legal. Some lists still do. It's definitely a reasonable option to grab stuff like Razorcat or other very high impact creatures. I currently cut it because I feel it's a little bit too expensive and I'd rather work on my own game plan than steal another player's creature. We have Expedition Map, which tutors up and land into your hand so you can grab your utility lands. And then we have Reshape, which is basically similar to Transmute Artifact. It tutors up an artifact, you have to pay the mana cost, sacrifice another artifact, etc. It's basically the worst Transmute Artifact. And yeah, what I forgot to mention is that Bribery could be used as a hard win-con. Once you have comboed off, you could use Bribery to steal an opponent's Thassa's Oracle and just win the game from there. But yeah, I don't think that's really necessary. It's still a good card though. Let's get to Counter Magic. So like I mentioned in the intro, this is where your expertise shines. So there are a lot of counter spells to choose from, and you have to use your expertise to choose the best counter spells for your meta. Generally speaking, we want counter spells to be cheap and wide. So we want them to hit a lot of stuff. Okay, so counter spell, of course, it's the original Gangster. We have Delay, which is a hard counter in cEDH because like usually games don't go that long, and even if they do, usually you counter a counter spell, and in the moment your opponent will be able to recast it, it will not be relevant. It's also really nice that it only costs 1 blue and 1 colorless, so it's easy to cast. We have Dispel, it stops early win attempts from Turbonaws. We have Fierce Guardianship, another staple in cEDH, it's free to cast when we have Urza in play, which is usually turn 2, turn 3. Flusterstorm, another staple, especially against Stormy decks. We have Force of Negation, really good counter spell to stop your opponent from going off. It counters spells in exile some, so it's very useful against Underworld Breach strategies. Force of Will, the best counter spell ever printed. Mana Drain, pretty much counter spell on steroids. We have Miscast, which is, in my opinion, very good counter spell. It counters instants or sorcery if your opponent can't pay 3 extra mana, which they usually can't. So it's basically a hard counter spell against a lot of combo stuff and a lot of payoffs, like Ad Nauseam or Peer into the Abyss. Then we have Mental Misstep, another staple. We usually target stuff like Deafening Silence or a fish, or we can target a Carpet of Flowers with that. We have Nasset's Reversal. Also super interesting card. Not only is it a combo piece, but you can actually steal your opponent's spells. Like you can steal a Tutor, you can steal an Ad Nauseam, Peer into the Abyss. Very underplayed card, very valuable card in this deck. Yeah, next card will be Pact of Negation, also core piece. Staple in cEDH, as well as Swan Song. Counters instants, sorceries, and enchantments. That's pretty wide for only 1 blue mana. And will give your opponent a blue bird token, a swan, which is hardly relevant, and you can use it to create infinite swans yourself. Another spell I'm currently on is Mindbreak Trap. It's incredible against stormy decks, incredible against fast decks, Turbo Moss decks. Once they have cast their rituals and want to go into their payoff, you just Mind Break Trap it. You don't even counter the spell, you exile it, so that's really nice. It works against uncounterable stuff, and you literally pay 0 mana when your opponent has cast his third spell. So it's usually free to cast. Really nice card. Works extremely well against Underworld Breach and Brain Freeze strategies, as it actually exiles all copies on the stack. Notable options. Counterbalance. Really nice card. It's unfortunately an enchantment, so we can't efficiently tutor for it, but it's really good to have, especially in Staxy situations like Rule of Law opponents, so you can just counter spells without actually casting spells and keep your interaction pretty much free. So it's really nice. It definitely pulls its weight, so once you've played against this card, you will know how strong it is. We have Spell Pierce. It's pretty similar to Miscast, but it's a little bit wider, so it counters every non-creature spell, also artifacts and enchantments or planeswalkers, but it's not as hard as of a counter, so your opponents only have to pay 2 extra mana. Definitely reasonable if you, for example, have an opponent that plays a planeswalker as a commander, for example. We have Misdirection, also a card that sees a lot of plays nowadays. It changes the target of target spell with a single target, so that could be a Peer into the Abyss, that could be a counter spell, that could be a removal. It's basically a counter spell you can cast for free by exiling a blue card, like you do for Force of Will, and interact on the stack. Very nice card. Then we have another new card that's Wash Away. It's a 1 mana instant that counters a spell that wasn't cast from its owner's hand. So that could be something cast with an Underworld Breach, or that could be something cast from the command zone, like a commander. And that only for 1 mana, super high value, so you should definitely have a look at that counterspell. Let's go to the Control and Stacks section. So this is the next section where your expertise comes to play. At the moment, core cards are Ether Spellbomb, because it's very valuable. You pay 1 mana for an artifact that pretty much replaces itself by sacrificing it. You can bounce another creature, you can bounce a Hate Bear, you can bounce Urza to create another construct token, pretty much any creature you want to get rid of. We have Back to Basics, one of the strongest Stax pieces in my opinion. It's hard to tutor for, basically because it's an enchantment, but the impact it has on games usually is so strong that people don't want to see this on the battlefield. And as we play a monocolored deck, we are wholly affected by this. We have Chain of Vapor, soft removal, bounce spell. That can also be used as a ritual. You can bounce your own rocks into your hand, sacrifice your lands, recast the rocks to create the mana you need to go off. We have Cyclonic Rift, another staple to get rid of opponent's boards. I've got Nasset, Path of Fields. She allows us to dig into our library, draw our library with a Hullbreaker Horror loop, and she also is a combo piece in order to get our opponent's Hellbent. We have Resculpt, fairly new addition to the deck, really nice. It gets rid of creatures and artifact, but not only that, it exiles them, which is really great against indestructible stuff, and the fact that it can get rid of artifacts is very valuable, as you can get rid of Null Rod or Cursed Totem. And then we have the staples, Static Orb and Winter Orb for Urza. These are usually symmetrical effects, but as we can tap these with Urza's activated ability on our last opponent's end step, they will be asymmetrical, so we won't be affected by them as long as Urza's in play. Really nice to have. Torment Script, staple Graveyard Hate, 0 mana, basically a Mock Sapphire. If you play it with Urza, can sacrifice to exile an opponent's graveyard. Super good against graveyard strategies, Underworld Breach, Reanimator strategies, just super good to have. Then we have Torpor Orb. This is an incredibly strong Stax piece, especially against Dockside Extortionist and Thassa's Oracle. Of course, we want to sequence this in a way that allows us to get a construct token before we cast Torpor Orb. And if we want to create infinite constructs, we first need to get rid of the Torpor Orb if it's in play. And then we have one of the strongest Stax pieces in the game, Trinisphere. especially in cEDH meta, where everything is super cheap to cast. Trinisphere basically locks a lot of people out from storming off. Everything our opponents want to cast will cost at least 3 mana. There's no way around this. So any cost reduction won't work. Trinisphere always makes everything cost at least 3 mana, which basically stops a lot of stormy decks from ever doing anything if they can't get rid of it. And as we can tap it with Urza, it's basically asymmetrical. So if we need it to be tapped in order to cast a free counterspell, we can tap it. I currently also included Pithing Needle, as it's really good against activated abilities like Thrasios, Najeela, or even Razaketh. Now we come to the notable options. Very interesting. There's stuff like Junto Stax, which is good against dog-heavy metas. We have Lantern of the Lost, additional graveyard hate. Legacy's Allure. This enchantment can steal pesky creatures at instant speed, so that's really good. It's at its best when you cast it early. It kind of becomes a dead card when you draw it in the late game or in the mid game, but when you cast it early, it's super good to steal an opponent's combo piece or an opponent's commander. We have Pongify. Very cheap and efficient creature removal. Gives you instant speed, gives your creature a green ape instead. 3/3 green ape. Really worth it, especially against hate bears. Same goes for Rapid Hybridization. Gives your opponent a 3/3 green frog lizard instead. Relic of Progenitus. Additional graveyard hate. Same for Soul Guide Lantern. More graveyard hate. We have Steel Enchantment. I know that some of the top cEDH Urza players are on Steel Enchantment. It can be really good. It's usually good because there's usually an enchantment in play that's worth stealing, like a Carpet of Flowers or Ristic Study, or even something like Smothering Tithe. I'm currently not on it as it's not really tutorable, and I'd rather use my Mulligan mixture to tutor up in Power Artifact. And we have Storage Matrix. It's basically a weaker version of Winter Orb and Static Orb, but if you want the redundancy, you can certainly play it. Submerge. Another bounce spell that's free to cast, especially good against Collector Oof and Manglehorn, as those opponents will definitely have a forest in play. Then we have Tanglewire. Super nice card to play in the early game, as it's basically asymmetrical. Your opponents will be affected by the fading 4 first. When it comes back to you, it will be fading 3. So you will only have to tap 3 permanents, one of which can be Tanglewire, so you only have to tap 2 permanents. So you will definitely have an advantage when you cast it. Tempted by the Reek. Another new card some of the top cEDH Urza players are on. It allows you to steal 3 creatures from your opponents. Really good, can be combo pieces, can be mana dogs, just to set them behind a bit and further your gameplay. Vedalken's Shackles, very similar to Legacy's Allure, lets you steal a creature. And then we have Winds of Rebuke, another bounce spell that allows you to mill your opponents. So if we loop this, we can actually win by milling our opponents. There are, of course, a lot more options, a lot more soft removal spells you can use. Alchemist Retrieval, Geist Wave would be new cards that could be played. Those choices will be up to you, and we will address that in the brewing section later on. Let's get to the notable exclusions. We have Arcane Laboratory. That's a mono-blue rule of law effect, and there's a really good reason for us not to play this card. 2 of our combos are storm-based, and we usually want to chain cheap artifacts into each other. So while we're not a storm deck, we play to the board, and we chain stuff into each other. We want to put cards on the board. We want to cast a lot of spells. So having a rule of law effect on our side really stops our game plan, and it actually also stops us from comboing off. So getting past a rule of law effect can be a pain, and then having your own on the board can make it even harder. So we don't want that. Then of course we have a Curse Totem. Yes, we don't play creatures, but we need to activate our own commander's creature activated ability. So we can't play Curse Totem, although could seem like it makes sense, it doesn't. And then we have Grafdigger's Cage, which is a staple in UPS version because it stops graveyard strategies and evolution strategies. It's a really strong stacks piece. Only one CMC it can be tutored with Urza Saga, but we can't use it in the Polykraken build because it also stops Polymorph and Proteus Staff, from cheating Hullbreaker Horror into play. So it numbers with our main tutor line, and that's why we don't play it. Let's get to the combo package. Well, what do we have? We have Dramatic Reversal, which is basically also a ritual. We have Isochron Scepter, which can be used to imprint counterspells or something like Brainstorm to filter through your deck. We have the Hullbreaker Horror, which is a very resilient combo piece that comes with protection. It's a big body, so it can be a beater. And it also counters your opponent's spells if you cast an instant, and that can make it a very efficient control piece as well. And then the only actual combo card we have is Power Artifact. So this is the only card that serves only one purpose, and that is being a combo piece. There are notable options. You could play Basalt Monolith, Rings of Brightheart combo. We do not in cEDH because the combo is very inefficient and the cards are bad, but it does give you infinite mana. And then you could also add Tidesport Tyrant to the deck. This card used to be played before Hullbreaker Horror was printed. The deck was called Urza Polytyrant back then, but now that Hullbreaker Horror is a thing, we don't need the Tidesport Tyrant anymore because it's just a worse option. And I think that's about it. If you want to have a look at the budget replacement sections, feel free to do so. The link will be in the description box below. Okay, so now that you know how the deck functions, how to combo off, how to sequence a win, and what cards to play and what cards not to play, we will brew a new Urza list. This list will be adapted to a specific meta, and for this example I chose to adapt this list to a meta that has a lot of hate bears, maybe some rule of law effects on those hate bears, and relies on graveyard strategies a lot. So not so much a Turbo Norse meta, but more of a mid-rangey, staxy, graveyard-centric meta. So how do I go about brewing Urza? So what we have right here is a list that we consider to be the core. So it's a 90 card list that has all the cards in it I have listed in the single card discussions under core cards. And if you scroll down right here, you can see that I have 44 cards in the considering sections. And these 44 cards are listed in the current inclusions or notable options section of the single card discussion. What are we going to do with this list right now? We will use cards from the considering section in order to adapt our core to the meta I just mentioned before. Let's have a look at this list right now. So what we need in order to deal with the meta I just described is we need creature removal, we need to be able to generate value under a rule of law effect or other hate effects like card draw denial, and we also need to be able to disrupt graveyard strategies, so we need graveyard hate. The only removal card we have right now on the list is Resculpt. We have some soft removal in the form of Chain of Vapor, Cyclonic Rift, and Aether Spellbomb. And as for graveyard hate, we only have Tormod's Crypt. Okay, so let's have a look at the considerant section to adapt the list. We will start with the lands first. So at the moment we have 24 lands, and we want to be on 30 lands if we play Tabernacle, and at the very least 29. And if we don't play Tabernacle, we can be at 29 or 28 lands. So let's start. We have Academy Runes, Recursion, not really needed. Blast Zone, removal, yes please, let's add this to the list. Move to main board. Boseiju could come in useful, probably not the best card to play in a rule of law situation. Well, it makes your stuff uncounterable, but you also can't really go off under the rule of law, so not really that needed. Cephalid Coliseum, also not needed. Probably the best interaction to have against Thassa's Oracle if you can use the Threshold effect, but it's more of a Staxy meta. So same for City of Traders, Crystal Vein, and Saprosan Scary. These allow us to cast Urza ahead of curve. We don't really need to ramp that incredibly fast if we don't face Turbo Norse decks, so let's not include these. But Emergence Zone could come in handy. So let's add this one. Tabernacle, definitely. Yeah, hate on the hate bears, so let's add this to the list. Move to main board. War Room, a little draw engine that works under a rule of law effect, so let's add this as well. And let's add Tolaria West as a tutor to grab those utility lands or interaction or a 0 CMC artifact. Move to mainboard. Let's see what we have right now. We have 29 lands. Tabernacle and Tolaria West don't really count, so we're effectively at 27 lands. We want to definitely play one more island, so let's go to 16, and now we are at 30 lands. We have 4 more slots to fill. We can cut cards later on, so let's have a look at the sorceries. So my thinking is that if we are under a rule of law effect, we really want to be able to generate value in our opponent's turns, so we shouldn't rely on sorceries that much and rather look into the instant section. So I will not take any of these cards into considering, but I will have a look at the instants. And what I really like are effects like Dig Through Time, Impulse, and Memory Deluge, as they do not draw cards, but have you look at the top cards and then put them into your hand. This works through card draw denial, so I will add 1 or 2 of these, maybe Impulse as it's cheap to cast. Move this to mainboard, and then Dig Through Time can come in handy in those Staxier situations where you can use it in instant speeds when your graveyard's already pretty full. Same goes for Memory Deluge. Let's add Memory Deluge right now. Move to mainboard. Let's also add Dig Through Time. Why not? Move this to mainboard. So all of these work in your opponent's turns and through card draw denial. Mindbreak Trap, really good against Stormy decks, really good against Underworld Breach, but this is probably not the meta for it. Misdirection, also a good include, maybe also not the best interaction for this meta. Paradoxical Outcome, like I said in the single card discussion, this card is really versatile, like it can be protection, it can be a huge draw spell, it works at instant speed. It also can be a ritual if you have a huge board presence, but if we face a lot of stacks, we really don't want to play this card. Pongify and Rapid Hybridization, however, are creature removal, so we do want to play this. Move to mainboard, Rapid Hybridization, move to mainboard. Then we have Spell Pierce, yeah, it's okay, but then again, in most Staxy situations, people will probably have the mana to pay for this. This is much better in really fast metas, so when your opponents try to go off like turn 1, turn 2, and are very tight on mana. Submerge, really good include in this list, because it's basically free to cast. If your opponents have a lot of hate bears, they're probably playing green, so this will be free to cast, and then put the hate bear on top of its honest library. And if you do this in reaction to a shuffle effect like a fetch land, you will probably permanently get rid of the hate bear. So let's add this to the list. Move to mainboard. Wash Away, good interaction against graveyard strategies, maybe also probably more so against commander-centric lists. Let's keep this in mind. Winds of Rebuke, nice soft removal, bounce spell. Mills 2 cards, which can be used in a loop to mill your opponents, but it fuels your opponent's graveyards, and we don't want to do this in this list against this meta, so let's not play this. Move on to enchantments. We have Steel Enchantment and Legacy's Allure. 2 steal effects, and usually steal effects are really good because you get value of your opponent's cards, but most Stax effects and hate effects are symmetrical, and we really don't want them to stick around. We want to remove them. So stealing a hate bear or stealing a rule of law is probably not what we want to do. But right here we have Counterbalance. This is probably one of the strongest inclusions in a Staxy meta, because you can counter your opponent's spells without even casting a single spell, and it's really hard to interact with, as it's a triggered ability, not a spell you cast. So this really pulls its weight. Let's add this to the list. Okay, what else do we need? We need to draw more cards, and we need to hate on graveyards. Vidalcan Shackles. Steel effect, not the best thing to play in this list. Tangle Wire, really good against Stormy decks, not so much against Staxy, mid-rangey decks, so let's not play this one. Storage Matrix, an additional Winter Orb, Static Orb effect, worse than both. We already play the best ones, probably not the best option right here. But we need Graveyard Hate, and we have Soul Guide Lantern, Relic of Progenitus, and Lantern of the Lost. And I will definitely add Relic, because it's the best graveyard hate next to Tormod's Crypt for our list. Then I might also add Lantern of the Lost, because it's very similar to Relic of Progenitus. Soul Guide Lantern, like if you use it, you don't draw a card. If you use it to exile graveyards, you don't draw a card. But Lantern of the Lost will exile graveyards and also draw you a card. Really want to draw cards, so let's add this one. Move it to the main board. June to Stax. Good against dog-heavy lists, like if you play against a mono-green list, for example. But probably not the best include for us. Eye of Vecna. Really good, draws cards under rule of law effects. Let's add this one. And it's also optional, so we don't have to do it if there is card draw denial. It's just another artifact, so move to the main board. Expedition map. This one tutors up lands, but we really don't need that as we already have Tolaria West, so let's not add this one to the list. Okay, so we've been through the considering section, and let's have a look at our card count. We are at 106, so we need to get rid of 6 cards from the list. What could we get rid of? Let's start with sorceries. So, like I just mentioned, if there's a lot of stacks, we really need to make use of our opponent's turns. So we don't want to rely on card draw effects that only work in our opponent's turn. So I will cut Ponder, move to considering, and Preordain. I am a huge fan of 1 CMC card draw spells, especially these two, but we just added instant speed digging spells like Dig Through Time, Impulse, and Memory Deluge, so these are probably better options in the list. Then I will also cut Personal Tutor, as we just cut 2 cheap card draw spells that really synergize well with Personal Tutor. This can be cut as well. It's really slow and it's telegraphed, and it lets your opponent interact with what you're trying to get. So probably not the best option. Let's put this into considering. Still need to get rid of 3 more cards. Yeah, what I want to get rid of next is maybe Chain of Vapor. Yes, it's cheap, but your opponents can use it under a rule of law effect to get rid of your stuff. So if you try to use this when you're trying to combo off, your opponents can just use it to bounce an important piece you have in play. So it's also probably not the best option. And we already have other forms of removal and bounce spells. So, such as Submerge, really good card in this meta. So let's get rid of Chain of Vapor. Move to considering. And then we also still need to get rid of 2 cards. We can cut, yeah, another option would be Torpor Orb. So Torpor Orb is really good against Dockside, because Dockside enables really strong payoffs like Ad Nauseam, Peer into the Abyss, Rathercat, whatever. But if you are in a Staxy situation, your opponents won't be able to cast Dockside and then go off the same turn. So we actually don't really need the Torpor Orb. Same goes for Thassa's Oracle. If there's a rule of law effect in play, your opponents won't be able to win off of Thassa's Oracle that easily. So we maybe don't need this. So let's put this into considering for the moment. And then we need to get rid of 1 more card. Let's see, what else could we get rid of? What else could we cut here? Maybe another sorcery. It's not 100% needed. Recurring Insight maybe. Yes, it's really strong, but the rebound effect under a rule of law on the card draw denial, maybe not the best option to have. So yeah, I will just cut this for the moment. Move to considering. Okay, so what did we do right now? We have card draw or digging that works under a rule of law effect and under card draw denial effects. We have interaction that disrupts graveyard strategies like Lantern of the Lost, Relic of Progenitus, and Tormod's Crypt. We have creature removal in the form of Pongify, Rapid Hybridization, Resculpt, and Submerge. We have hate in the form of Tabernacle. We have card draw in the form of War Room, We have Blaststone as additional removal. We can tutor all this up with Tularia West. So yeah, I think this list is pretty well adapted to the specific meta. Definitely not finished. You should test your list out, make changes based on your experience with certain cards. But this is just an example of how I go about brewing and analyzing an Urza list. So you should not just use the primal list and then think it's the best Urza list you can ever play. The primal list is meant to be a well-rounded list to play in a lot of different metas. It's not the best list for your meta. The best list for your meta is the list you make yourself adapted to your meta. You will have to make the choices on hate and Stax pieces, as well as counterspells. And that's how I go about it. Use the core, use the cards in considering, put inside the deck what you think is valuable, and then take out what you don't think is valuable. And that's my Urza Polykraken brew. Okay, so now that we have just brewed a new Urza list adapted to a specific meta, we will do some mulligans with the list. We have the list right here, and I will start by restarting the game in order to get a fresh hand of 7. What we are looking for is fast mana, some way to interact with the board, removal, counterspells, graveyard hate, and then a way to assemble a combo. That would be an ideal hand. Let's see what we get. Do we have here? We have a land, we have a combo piece, we have another combo piece, we have an artifact tutor, hate, card draw, removal, or a bounce spell, but we don't have fast mana. We don't have a clear game plan to do anything if we don't draw into a rock. This is not a keepable hand, so I will restart and take the free mulligan to my second hand of 7. This looks good. Well, we don't have mana rocks, but we have 3 lands, so that will be a turn 1 Mystic Remora. We will probably keep it around turn 2, let it die turn 3, cast the Rhystic Study to draw a lot of cards. It's not the best hand, but it's, well, having Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study feels really good. We will draw a ton of cards with this, if they go through. We have an Impulse to draw even more cards, we have War Room to draw even more cards, we have Intuition to tutor up something. It's not the best hand. I would definitely prefer to have like a mana rock right here. Any one would be good, but it is what it is. Mystic Remora turn 1, Rhystic Study turn 2 to turn 3 is basically always a keep, so I would keep this hand, even though I would prefer to have a mana rock. That was the first mulligan. Let's do another one. Let's start with a fresh hand of 7. Let's see what we got here. We have a no lander, so this is a mull. We have power artifact and we have a transmuter artifact, but we don't have any lands. We have nothing to do turn 1, so we will mull and use the free mull to go to our second hand of 7. Interesting. We have Snow-Covered Island, Jeweled Amulet, turn 1, so we have 2 mana, turn 2. Definitely have 2 mana, turn 2. But then again, well, we have a tutor, so we could actually sacrifice the Jeweled Amulet to get a mana vault, and then later use Muddle the Mixture to get dramatic reversal from Icecrown Scepter, but then we would still need another artifact in play to make infinite mana. It's not an ideal land. It looks good. We have pretty high card quality right here, but I will still mull this to 6. So mulligan number 2, go down to 6 cards. Yeah, this looks better. So we have turn 1, Snow-Covered Island, Chromox, probably ditch the Resculpt or the Pact into a Grim Monolith. Then we can turn 2 probably cast Nasset Pot of Veils. Turn 3, if everything goes to plan, we can cast Time Twister. And thinking about that, I would probably get rid of the Resculpt in order to put the Chromox into play and imprint it. So that would be turn 1, Monolith, turn 2, hopefully Narset's Reversal if we draw into another land or rock. And then definitely turn 3, Narset's Reversal, Narset, Part of Veils, as we have the Monolith. And then most likely we'll be able to cast Time Twister on turn. We can still use Narset to dig deeper into our library. And we would probably also be able to cast, Urza out of Kabul. So this could be a turn 2 Urza as well. This is a good hand. I would keep this hand, and I would use the resculpt to imprint it into a Chromox. Okay, so let's do a final mulligan. Restart, fresh hand of 7. Yeah, this looks interesting. So we have 1, 2, 3 lands. Okay, only one of which produces blue, but we have Graveyard Hate. We have a way to get rid of the lands or cards we don't want in the hand. We have Intuition, Mana Crypt, turn 1 Mana Crypt, always the best thing to have, best rock to have. Lantern of the Lost deals with artifact with graveyard strategies, so I would probably keep this hand. It's not the best, so like we could use another island maybe instead of War Room, but we will probably draw into one, play a lot of them, so this is a keepable hand in my opinion. I would keep this hand. This was pretty quick, so let's maybe do another one. Fresh hand of 7. Is this keepable? Turn 1, Inventor Sphere, Guild Probe, Mox Opal, won't be active, can't cast Brainstorm, not a keep. Mold down to our second hand of 7. No fast mana. Nothing really to do here turn 1, so mulligan to go down to 6. Hullbreaker Horror, we could ditch this as we can polymorph into it, but still not a satisfying hand. No fast mana. We have a combo piece that we can't tutor the second piece for, so not the best thing to have here. Go down to 5. This is better. So we can get rid of Dig Through Time. Too expensive to cast. We can't really use it early, and we have the baby Dig Through Time with Impulse, so get rid of this. Then we have turn 1, Snow-Covered Island, Soul Ring. Turn 2, we can use Impulse. We have Narset. We have Counterbalance. We want to keep the Counterbalance. Keeps us in play. It stops our opponents. We don't really need to interact. So we can actually... Can we get rid of Merchant Scroll? Yes, we can get rid of Merchant Scroll. And then draw with Impulse. Or dig a little bit deeper with Impulse. Dig a little bit deeper with Narset. The only thing we need right now is another Snow-Covered Island. So getting rid of Merchant Scroll is probably the best idea here. And yeah, I would keep a hand just like this. It's a 5-card hand. It will never be the perfect hand, but it's good enough to play. We have an island, fast mana, card draw, Stax, which is also a synergistic card that digs into our library. Incredibly strong Stax piece here with Counterbalance, control card. The only thing we need for this hand to be really good would be another Snow-Covered Island, which we probably draw into within the first turn. So, keepable hand. As you might remember, in the beginning of the video I told you that there were 2 major lists for cEDH Urza. One being Polykraken, the one we just talked about, and the other being Urza Power Scepter. Urza Power Scepter is a little bit different than the Polykraken list, but not too much. If you go to the primer, you will see that here on the left I have a short section about the Urza Power Scepter list. If you click it, you will see a short paragraph about the difference between UPS, Urza Power Scepter, and UPK, Urza Polykraken. And then down here you will find my cEDH Urza Power Scepter list, which is also on the decklist database. And if you click this link right here, you will immediately be presented with all the difference in the list. So let's click it. And there you go. You're at the Power Scepter primer. As you can see, the Power Scepter list plays creatures other than Hullbreaker Horror. This means that we cannot use Polymorph and Proteus Staff in this list, which means we can't efficiently tutor Hullbreaker Horror into play, but we can play very high impact utility creatures like Spellseeker to tutor up instance, or sorceries. We can use Spell Sky to protect Urza and redirect spells. Of course, the staple Gilded Drake, and then one of the new cards would be Malevolent Hermit. Then we have my favorite, Phyrexian Metamorph. It's kind of like a Phantasmal Image, but we can tutor it since it's an artifact. It only costs 3 mana and 2 life, which we can easily pay, and then it also taps itself for mana if you have Urza on board. So it's effectively as cheap as a Phantasmal Image, but it can copy a creature or an artifact and it sticks around. So this has been my favorite card in Urza Power Scepter. We also have Wandering Archaic, really nice card when you want to go for mana denial strategies. So if your opponents can't pay for the spells they cast, you will always get a copy of them. Super strong under Rule of Law. Same as Consecrated Sphinx. This creature is just the biggest bomb. If it sticks around for like 1 or 2 turn cycles, it's usually game ending. Draws so many cards. Synergizes well with wheels, of course, and I've seen games literally warp around this card, like everybody casting their Gilded Drake to get it, steal it back, copy it, etc., etc. And then finally, what we also have in Urza Power Scepter is Gravedigger's Cage. Gravedigger's Cage is one of the strongest Stax pieces you can play in a mono-blue list. It basically stops creatures from graveyards and libraries to enter the battlefield, so it stops polymorph effects and evolution effects. Another reason we can't play polymorph or Proteus Staff. But it also completely shuts down most graveyard strategies. So also really strong here. Stops Underworld Breach, Yawgmoth Will. Really nice card to have. 1 CMC, so it's tutorable with Urza Saga. Yeah, like I said, I really prefer piloting this list. It's definitely harder to combo off as you don't have this 1 card combo you can access via polymorph Proteus Staff. So we do play Hullbreaker Horror, but we don't have access to it that easily. But it plays really strong value creatures with good utility, good effects to really grind in a Staxy game. But I go back and forth between 2 lists. I just have cards for both lists and then I switch around however I feel then on a given day. And yeah, if you go to the Power Scepter deck list right here, you'll find it right here, and it also has a mini primer where you can read everything about Power Scepter. It's really short because the in-detail stuff about gameplay is written down in the collaborative primer we just went through. Okay, and that's it with Urza Power Scepter. You should definitely give it a try. I really like this list. It's really strong and just a lot of fun. And with this, we come to an end. Thank you for listening to my 2-hour monologue about cEDH Urza. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, share the video with your friends, and join our Discord server. You will find the links in the description box below. Have a nice day.